Hi, I'm Brad Mavis, and I want to remind you that while I have smart tax attorneys and tax professionals working for me and for our clients, I am not an attorney and I'm certainly not your attorney. So recently I was at an in-person IRS training and seminar on the employee retention credit. And so the IRS is putting on these seminars all across the country right now because they're really focused on enforcement. Unsurprisingly, if you've been paying attention to the employee retention credit, unfortunately, it's been a credit that's been just rife with abuse and fraud and misunderstanding, complications, confusion, and ongoing updates to rules, updates to notices, letters from the Office of Chief Counsel providing clarification. And so it's turned into a credit that's turned into a bit of a challenge for the IRS to administer, but also one that unfortunately has been abused by some of these high volume mills that were, they call them ERC mills, that were basically just robo-filing these ERC claims. And so I wanted to go through this meeting and share a little bit about it because it was really insightful. I thought it was, really important to put what I was talking about, put it out there. And so the first thing I thought was interesting was that it was put on not by the civil enforcement division, but by the criminal enforcement division of the IRS. So the IRS has two enforcement divisions, one's civil, one's criminal. And so obviously criminals, when you do something really bad, and these are the guys that go after the money launderers and drug cartels, and they carry guns and they take people down. And so it was interesting that it was put on by the criminal division. And one of the things that they highlighted, I was looking down my notes here, was that there's actual criminal enforcement that's going around the ERC. They highlighted a fraud example of somebody that they had arrested and they were pursuing charges on right now. And this individual engaged in blatant fraud. I think 150 filings that this individual made up. He forged the signatures of his so-called clients. He collected the money that he was filing for the clients. He cashed the checks, outright fraud. So understandably, and thankfully, they caught this guy and they're prosecuting him, and as they should, right? We're big believers that if people are breaking the rules, they're fraudulent in their intent, they absolutely should be persecuted. That's what keeps the system working for all of us, is that there's actual enforcement of these things. So it was interesting that the criminal division was putting this on. But one of the things that they talked about, and I have a whole separate video on this, is they talked a lot about contingent fees, particularly as it relates to advisors who charge contingency fees, and they spent a lot of time talking about how these contingency fees could are a violation of Circular 230. And if you want a deep dive on that, a whole separate video on that, I encourage you to watch it. There's situations where contingency fees are expressly disallowed. But there's also certain situations where contingency fees have actually gone through lawsuits. This has been settled in court where they're expressly allowed. So it was interesting to see that the agency was taking kind of a very myopic view, if you will, very one-dimensional view of the contingency fee question. Courts in the history kind of showed there might be a lot more nuance around that. Then another thing that was super important, the IRS really focused on, they used the phrase tailored analysis. The ERC requires a tailored analysis of each individual taxpayer's and business's unique set of facts and circumstances. And thoroughness is paramount when preparing a claim. And so I know for us, with the clients we've worked with, we spent a lot of time with interviews, with written documentation, what we call narrative impact analysis reports that were very comprehensive in nature. And that's exactly what the IRS is saying they're expecting to see during these audits. They want to see a thorough analysis that articulates an individual taxpayer's position. How did they establish eligibility? And so a big part of this is that there were so many of these robo-files that were out there that, maybe, after a 5-minute conversation, talking with a taxpayer, they say, yep, you qualify, just give us your information, we'll file for you. Or not, sometimes don't even give us your information. Hey, just sign in here and we can automatically grab your information. I remember I saw recently an article, one of the major publications, maybe in the Wall Street Journal, I can't remember, but where taxpayers said, yeah, I talked to this company because I wanted to evaluate my eligibility. Next thing I knew, they said that they had filed for me and I just wanted to check to see if we were even eligible or not, right? So there are these robo-filers that weren't providing this analysis. So that's an important consideration for the IRS at the moment, is that, was there an actual analysis done? And that's that's a critical part of that. So there's a checklist out there that they published. I've read through it. We've been aware of it for some time. It's not the easiest thing to follow. It's helpful. So if you're not aware of it, definitely go look for the eligibility guide. But it's a little clunky to use. But definitely, if you're not aware of it, take a look at it. If you have questions on eligibility, at least take a glance at that to see does it kind of pass the sniff test. In addition, the IRS talked about there's a really unique program that's out there, and I have a whole different video on this too, which is basically called the Voluntary Disclosure Program and the Withdrawal Program. And so these are actually two different programs. And and I dive into a lot more detail on another video of what these programs are, how they work. But uniquely enough, the IRS has put out these withdrawal programs that are temporary in nature, kind of marketing it as this low risk way to give the money back if you filed, you weren't eligible for it. But there's saying a little bit of hair around this, right? It's a little messy. It's not quite perfect. And so the other video goes into some of the trade-offs and some of the considerations you have to think about when going through these disclosure programs. And they're very different, voluntary versus withdrawal. There's different nuances to each one, but it is an important option, and it is something that needs to be reviewed to determine whether or not that makes sense for an individual taxpayer in their unique set of circumstances. So definitely want to be aware of that. And if you have questions about that, we're happy to kind of talk through that looks like for you, and if that might be an option for you. Lastly is, as we all know, that there's a moratorium on processing new ERC claims. The moratorium initially was through the end of the year, and then that got pushed to the end of January. When we were at the meeting, said that at this point the moratorium continues. They're not accepting new ERC claims, and they don't have a date in which they're going to restart accepting the claims. So we've heard different conversations that maybe that this is going to be after the April tax deadline. You might start seeing more of the claims get processed. You may start seeing more audits as well, as the IRS kind of wraps their arms around the ERC and what is and is not a partial suspension, kind of has some standard checks and balances around that. I mean, the IRS themselves have stated that they've had a hard time identifying what's a legitimate claim versus what's an illegitimate claim. And so they're spending a lot of time and work and effort on this, and training a lot of agents on how to audit claims and how to determine whether or not these are legitimate claims. So that's the highlight. The meeting was very insightful. It was, for us, it was very encouraging, because a lot of the things we heard the IRS talking about, we've already been doing for our clients for years now. And so we see that there's a huge opportunity for folks who may not have been as thorough to help them just button things up. So just a reminder, we have an amazing team. We have tax attorneys working for us. We have CPAs, we have tax professionals, all with a lot of very detailed ERC experience. And so we have a lot of details here. Just a reminder, I am not an attorney, and more importantly, I'm not your attorney. This is just general advice that I'm putting out there. But if you want to understand, if you have a particular question, want to review your specific situation, reach out, schedule time. Happy to chat with either me, we'll set up time with either me or one of the members of the team, and we could talk about your situation and what and how we might even be able to help. So thanks. Look forward to talking to you.